Hi, I'm Mike, PokeTips Mike, and today the Pokemon Sword and Shield news does not stop. Earlier this morning, we got a trailer showing off Galar form Ponyta, and then later on the Pokemon website was updated with new information. And now, courtesy of Gameinformer.com, we're finally getting some information about the starter Pokemons and their evolutions. Gameinformer sent some of their employees out to Tokyo, Japan, to GameFreak's headquarters to sit down with some of the developers of Pokemon Sword and Shield. While they were there, they conducted a lot of interviews with these Game Freak people, and as a result, we have 3 interviews where Game Freak discusses the new starter Pokemon and gives us little hints about their evolutions. And also, something I find very interesting is when we take a look at the information from these new interviews and apply it back to that old Ben Affleck Pokemon leak, not only does it match up extremely well, but it allows us to finally start getting a clear picture of what the evolutions for these starters are going to be. So if you're excited to learn new information about not only the starter Pokemon, but their evolutions as well, go ahead and give this video a thumbs up right now, and let's jump right into it. So the first starter Pokemon we're going to talk about is Grookey. Now, all 3 of these interviews were conducted in video form, so I'll tell you the most important points that came out of these interviews. First, they gave us a little backstory behind Grookey. Grookey loves to climb trees and has a bright character. Its demeanor makes people happy. The stick that Grookey uses is actually extremely cool. When Grookey uses the stick and hits the ground with it, it can make grass grow, which I would assume would be extremely important if you were some sort of Pokemon farmer. They also said that people who like to dance or are into parties would love Grookey, and that's going to be a little important later. And last, they also started comparing it to Chimchar, since they're both monkey starter Pokemon. In the comparison to Chimchar, they said you'll really see the difference between the 2 monkey starters when they start to evolve. However, they didn't show us exactly what Grookey evolves into. But when we compare the information we got out of this interview to that old Affleck leak, we can start to make a pretty clear picture. The Affleck leak tells us that Grookey will end up as a giant gorilla that beats a wood drum to attack. Again, by now, we know this Ben Affleck leak is extremely credible. Almost everything mentioned in this leak has come true, and the only things that haven't are things we haven't seen yet, like the starter evolutions. And when we compare that information, Grookey ending up as a giant gorilla that beats a wood drum to attack, to what we got out of this interview, it makes a lot of sense. Remember, earlier in the interview they said people who like to dance or are into parties would enjoy Grookey, and that's because when Grookey starts to evolve, it turns into that gorilla with the drum. That's also why they wouldn't answer if the stick would be important as it evolves, because they don't want to give it away, and when they compared it to Chimchar, you could see that Chimchar, when it evolves into Infernape, Infernape is kind of like a skinnier monkey. I'm assuming that Grookey is going to turn into like a big gorilla type thing, which will bang on the drum. That would definitely be a huge difference in its evolution path. And now when it came to Scorbunny's interview, my favorite starter, they described it as very energetic and always running around. They even said when it runs, fire comes up from the ground, which we could actually kind of see in one of the Pokemon Sword and Shield trailers. Now, interestingly, when the interviewer asked about the patches on Scorbunny's feet and everywhere else, they didn't want to go into too much detail about it. However, they did say that in Japan, patches are often used on designs for young, rambunctious kids. Which, would show the fact that Scorbunny is the first stage in its evolutionary line and is still the young, crazy one. Then, the most interesting and important detail that came out of this interview was when they said that when it grows, it will be very suspenseful, and you don't know what direction it will take. And again, when we look back at the highly credible Ben Affleck leak, it says here, Scorbunny will have fighting moves, but is pure fighter. I'm assuming when they said pure fighter here, it was a typo when they meant pure fire. But anyway, it continues and says, it becomes Raboot, but I don't remember the final evolution, except it looks like a fighter and it looks humanoid. So I guess that's what they were hinting at in the interview. They said you don't know what direction it would take, and when the leaker came out and told us the information about Scorbunny and its evolutions, they said it looks like it's going to be a fighting type, however it's just going to be fire. All I know is I'm extremely interested to know what Scorbunny's final evolution is going to look like. This seems like the most mysterious one out of them all so far. Now for the Sobble interview, this is the one where they really gave us the least details out of all the starters. They brought up how people who are kind, caring, and shy would choose Sobble because of the way it looks And they also brought up how Sobble can go into the water, become transparent, and fade away into the background, kind of hiding itself like a chameleon. We'll talk more on that later, but what I found the most interesting about this actually has nothing to do with its evolution at all, but more about Sobble and the acceptance of Sobble. Usually, most starter Pokemon are happy, you can see a little smile on their face, but Sobble is a stark contrast to all of that. It's very, well, sad. And in the interview, they actually said when they were designing Sobble, they weren't sure if Sobble's design would be accepted and liked worldwide. They weren't really worried if Sobble would be liked in Japan because they said that due to the culture of finding things cute if you feel sorry for it, people in Japan would like it. However, worldwide, they were kind of worried about Sobble being accepted, and I guess they're pretty happy now because a lot of people do seem to like Sobble. If you're part of that Sobble squad, let me know in the comments section. And at one point in the interview, James Turner, the art director of Pokemon Sword and Shield, mentioned how he really likes Sobble's evolutions, but he couldn't comment on them. Well, thanks for that tease, James. But what he won't tell us, the Ben Affleck leak does, so we can see here that Sobble becomes a Pokemon named Sisile, and then Inteleon, a chameleon with a spy theme. Again, that just makes so much sense because in the interview and in the first Pokemon Sword and Shield trailer, we get to see Sobble fade away and hide into the background like a chameleon. So seeing it take that concept even further as it evolves would be very cool, and I could see why James would like this Pokemon's evolutions. Again, I can't wait until they just show us what the evolutions are going to look like, instead of us looking through these interviews for tiny little details describing these Pokemon and going to leaks to try to figure out what they're going to be. Just show us the starters. And finally, at the end of the Sobble interview, we learned a few more interesting things. Number one, the starters for the Galar region were chosen specifically for a reason. Mr. Ohmori says when you play the game and you evolve the starters, you'll see why they evolve into what they do and think that it makes sense with the Galar region. And number two, if you look really closely at his shirt, that looks like a Rapidash design there. I think he's wearing one of those new Pokemon shirts, which I'll be talking about very soon. And that brings the series of starter Pokemon interviews on Gameinformer to a close. Thank you very much to Brian Shea for taking care of these articles. Just seeing all this Pokemon news is really making me wonder, who did the Ben Affleck leak? All of that stuff was so accurate, and it came so early on in the Pokemon Sword and Shield news cycle that when it first came out, people were doubting it. Now, months later after it came out, it seems like everything we've had revealed to us was on that leak, and I just want to know who did it? And also, why the picture of Ben Affleck? Anyway, my friends, now that we have a pretty good idea of what these starter Pokemon are going to evolve into, in the comments section, tell me what starter you're going to be choosing. For me, it's still Scorbunny. Although, depending on how Inteleon looks when we finally get to see it, I might choose Sobble instead. As always, thanks so much for watching the video. If you haven't already, give it a thumbs up right now, subscribe to the channel if you're new, follow me on Instagram at PokeTipsMike, and I'll be seeing you in the next one.